We would be honored if you would join us.
Welcome to Unmistakably Star Wars, your source for a high-quality, informative, and entertaining look into the Star Wars galaxy.
You know what? I think I like Will Huff Tarkin.
Will Huff Tarkin?
Yeah, that's his first name.
Will Huff?
Yeah. I'm reading the Tarkin novel right now.
Yeah?
And it's actually my reread. I read it.
A reread?
Yeah. It's my second time through. And thank you, Franklin Taylor, for...
I've heard it's never as good as the first time.
Oh, really? Sounds like a song lyric.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, it's actually phenomenal. And, Franklin has been, who's one of our writers on the site, he's been sort of like, we've been bantering back and forth on direct message on Twitter just about the novel. And what's interesting is, of course, James Luceno's writing this, and we know we got Catalyst that's coming out by him.
Right.
It's sort of in the same kind of series. The Tarkin novel deals with the Death Star, so it's sort of this kind of progression of this story that surrounded the Death Star. But what's fascinating is not this Tarkin. Tarkin's fascinating, but what's surprising that you might miss if you just kind of just blow through it and not pay attention to all these little details is there's a lot going on about Palpatine. And we are going to tell. And in fact, in about a month, we're going to have a show sort of devoted to books and character studies and the lore of Star Wars. And we're really excited about that. We're working on it now and kind of working out all the details. But I think one of our big first conversations is going to be about this Tarkin novel. And more importantly, about Palpatine and like his plans, because a lot of people have been talking about like who is Snoke, and and then of course they talk about who is Rey, who are her parents, and then of course one of the theories is she's somehow related to Palpatine, and we talked about it on a past episode.
Right.
But there's a lot of little tidbits throughout all this new canon about what Palpatine was up to. And the Tarkin novel touches on some of that. Yeah. And if you have not read it, I recommend it. It's a good read. And when you get to those chapters where you see the Emperor and Vader together, pay very close attention. Their conversations are fascinating. Yeah. And the Tarkin story, it kind of goes into his biography about how he became who he is when we see him in A New Hope. It's good stuff. I mean, it's really compelling and fun, and there's a lot to him and his relationship with the Emperor. And it even goes into sort of how Palpatine courted him to be sort of an ally in forging this empire. And it's really good stuff. And so as I'm rereading it, I would have put Lords of the Sith as like my top novel of these new novels in the canon, but rereading Tarkin, I'm kind of moving that up very high on my list that might even compete with that top spot. So,
wow.
Yeah, Tarkin, go read it, check it out. And we were even talking about doing a little segment on the show called Tarkin's Tidbits. I just like that. It's like
it's got a ring
kibbles
to
and
it.
bits, right?
Kibbles and bits. Tarkin's Tidbits.
Wow. Yeah. Well, welcome to Unmistakably Star Wars. It's so good to have you joining us. I am Jeremy, and I'm joined by Devin.
Greetings, Tauntauns.
And Barb.
Hey.
So we got a pretty good show coming up. But before we get to that, this Star Wars on Tap thing is kind of done stuff.
It's flowing, you could say.
Yes.
It is flowing.
Yes.
Yeah, so we just wrapped up round 2, which Tyler had his uncle on, which was super kind on Tyler's part, because my understanding, part of the pre-production dialogue about that was Tyler's uncle didn't often let him go to Tosche Station with his friends. So it's great that he brought his uncle on to Star Wars on Tap.
That's so good.
I know, right? This week, however, we are taking a trip around the globe, and we are going to connect with CJ from Australia. And if I can, I'd like to go ahead and just kind of prime our listeners for, here's just a sneak peek of our interview with CJ from Australia. Take a listen.
That's a lovely accent you have. New Jersey?
Austria.
Austria? Well then, good day, mate. Let's put another shrimp on the barbie.
Let's not.
So there you have it. There's just a little taste for the listener for round 3 Star Wars on Tap featuring CJ from Australia. Check that out. That's going to drop later this week.
You sounded a little bit like Jim Carrey there, Devin.
Well, I'll tell you, among other specialties, I'm a good method/character actor, Jeremy. It's true.
I'm finding out more and more about you every time we record.
Yes. Just imagine what happens off the air.
Oh, goodness. All right. So we got a pretty good show. We're going to be talking about
shooting for mediocrity once again.
From the hip.
Pretty good. That's all right.
It's pretty good.
It beats a flaming pile of bantha fodder.
We actually will have a semi-serious conversation later, but it's interesting. Right now, there's this. We were talking about before we went on there. There's a lull in the news.
There is a lull.
There's just not much coming out, and what has come out has been very Rebel centric. We know on the 24th on Saturday evening will be the premiere of season 3. It will begin. Here we go.
Yeah.
We'll get Thrawn back on the we'll get him back in the story.
Yes,
which is really exciting. And there was a few announcements this week in a clip about Rebels, and I think it would be good for us to talk through it and just bring it to people's attention that might not be paying a lot of attention to the news, especially when it comes to Rebels. So we're going to talk about those stories, but then we're also going to talk about the droids that are in Star Wars, but specifically K2SO. Alan Tudyk, is sort of doing the rounds or the circuit of cons and different comic cons and such. And he had an interview recently with Blaster, and he just brought up some really interesting things that I think might be worth having a conversation about. Of course, we'll talk a little bit about Death Star facts later, but then we're gonna get into our closer look segment. On this episode will be, I'm kind of interested in it because today, as we're recording, is September 11th.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking about second chances. And we're in this kind of midst of reflection on what's happened to the United States of America, but also other nations as a result of the war on terrorism and terrorist acts. And there are people that are more in mourning, but there's also people that have survived from those terrible attacks that are thinking about, well, what do I do next? And we thought it might just be an interesting conversation just in light of what we're thinking about and considering about second chances or having a second chance at something you didn't think you would have a second chance at.
Yeah.
And we think that Star Wars has not just one. I think we always focus on sort of the moment where where Vader disappears and Anakin returns and saves Luke at the end of Return of the Jedi, sort of as a second chance moment.
Right.
But when you look at the landscape of Star Wars, there's a lot of little moments like that. And maybe even bigger. Maybe little moments isn't the right way to say it, but there are moments where we see characters have second chances, whether you're looking at Rebels or Clone Wars, or the films themselves, or the novels. There's just a lot of stories where you see characters have a second chance or get redemption in some way. And so that will be our closer look segment today. I'm really excited to have that conversation. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to jump into the news.
I have good news for you, my lord.
That's so interesting.
Wait, there's something very weak coming through.
So I'm a huge fan of Katie Sackhoff. She's an actress. She's been in Battlestar Galactica, which is the most famous thing she's really done. She's on Longmire, which is a show on Netflix.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, it's Wyoming, I think, is where it takes place. I think
it's where it's supposed to take place.
Yeah,
it's actually shot in New Mexico. But
oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So she plays a sheriff,
deputy. Yes,
yeah, deputy out there. Why don't you just take it? But she's great in that, and she's always been charismatic. She was in one of the Riddick movies, those sci-fi movies with Vin Diesel, and the most recent one of those. And I've always enjoyed her. She played Starbuck on Battlestar Galactica, the 2003 kind of reboot that we saw. And she was voiced Bo-Katan, which was one of the characters, a Mandalorian character on the Clone Wars, and she's coming back. And that character, Bo-Katan's coming back. And just so if you're like, well, wait, who was that again? This was Satine, who was sort of the love interest of Obi-Wan and was the Duchess of Mandalore. We see this sister come back, or that's who she was in the Clone Wars, and here she is returning to Rebels, and she served like Pre Vizsla, and she had interactions with Maul, and so there's a lot of like history with this character.
Right.
I think she was in probably about 4, maybe 5 episodes of Clone Wars. I think some of our listeners would know the exact number and which ones and what season.
Right.
But I find that an interesting like story to come out right before we get the season, but it brings up a ton of questions for me about what we might get in this season number 3 of Rebels. But I'm curious what you guys think about this story coming out.
I think it's outstanding.
Yeah.
I think the 2 things that come to mind, first and foremost, were getting reintroduced to a character that has ties to the Clone Wars, which is great, and someone that has a pretty meaningful place within that animated series. And then part 2, which can't be understated, it's Katie effing Sackhoff.
She's great.
Yeah, she absolutely is. And I think that what's great about her is regardless of whatever setting she is in, whether it's this animated series, whether it's playing Starbuck, or whether it's in the Longmire series, she has so much like grit and sarcasm and just cynical nature within her characters that just oozes through, and I absolutely eat that up.
Yeah, she's great. And I'm really Mandalore has always fascinated me.
Yeah.
And I feel like we have gotten it. I mean, obviously we've gotten info about Mandalore and what was going on and Death Watch and all that stuff from the Clone Wars series.
Right.
But I feel like I don't have a full enough picture of where Mandalore is during the rebellion against the Empire. So I'm excited to see this sort
Where
of
they stand philosophically, you mean?
Yeah, where they stand philosophically. I mean, we've gotten a little bit of that last season. There was an episode with Sabine where she's, interacting. Kanan and Sabine going on this mission, trying to find like kind of a pathway, a hyperspace lane to where they can travel, and they're trying to make deals. And so we got to see some of the Mandalorians, but it was just one episode, real brief. It seems like based on some of the clips that we've seen, we're going to get a little bit more of Mandalore, and I think this character is saying that. So I'm pretty excited.
It seems to be getting a bit more, at least I've noticed, serious.
Yeah.
As I've gone back to get to know more about Rebels and watch from season 1, episode 1.
Yeah.
It's still, geared to kids as well, but season 2 kind of took a bit more of a serious turn, and looking at some of the titles coming in season 3 and seeing that preview that we were able to see from Celebration, and Ezra getting the haircut and everything, it just seems to be getting a bit darker. Not like it's still Rebels, but it's going to be very interesting to see season 3.
And there are listeners that are much more just well versed with Clone Wars than I am. I've watched it through once. I've gone back and watched selected story arcs, but it seemed like, and I know the Clone Wars episodes are all sort of out of order, and you can actually go online and see what order you should watch them in, but season-wise with the Clone Wars, it did seem to advance in its complexity and depth, and I don't know if darkness is the right word, but it does get a little more serious, a little bit heavier as you go, especially when you get to like the Maul stuff, and that's some really dark stuff. And it seems like Rebels is going on a similar trajectory. And recently we had a story up on the site about the Rogue One characters and if they'll die. And of course, we've talked about death recently on the podcast. And there was someone that had commented, one of our listeners basically said, will the characters in Rebels die? And I'm like, I just don't see how they can make it. Maybe a few will survive. I just have a hard time. And they were like, well, it's Disney. Disney is not going to kill off anybody. And I hear that. I see that argument. I understand that argument. I think it's a valid argument. I'm not fully there yet. I think we might lose some of these characters at some point. And I think seeing a clip like we saw, just this week about Ezra, and basically the clip, if you have not seen it, IGN ran it. I don't know if it's on like the StarWars.com website or on their YouTube channel. IGN ran the clip, and Ezra basically takes control over, this driver of a ATST type vehicle. I can't remember the exact abbreviation for it. And starts killing stormtroopers by taking control of this guy's mind. And you're right. I mean, we're going into this is not like awesome. I mean, this is some sort of dark stuff, and dark side stuff as well. And so, here we have this return of Bo-Katan, brings up a lot of questions about Mandalore and the Mandalorians, but also it brings up a question about Obi-Wan as well. I mean, do you guys think we'll see him? I mean, we're seeing sort of references to Maul, his motivations. We talked about this, I think, last week.
Yeah.
And there was a character description of Maul on the Disney XD channel that basically said he's fueled by revenge. And, of course, you can think of that. And the way it was worded, it was almost like a very specific revenge where, of course, he can seek revenge against Palpatine for what he did to him.
Right.
But, we talked about Obi-Wan, and there are other outlets out there, Star Wars outlets, that have said, yeah, this Obi-Wan thing might make more sense. Then we see Bo-Katan show up in this kind of like, here she comes.
Right.
And we know her relationship to Satine, and we know Obi-Wan's relationship to Satine. We know Maul's at play. And you just wonder if we're going to see old Ben show up.
It's going to be a crowded season if that happens.
It really is. I don't necessarily want to see him.
Yeah. I'll say no to Rebels, yes to Obi-Wan live action film.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
No, I have foreseen it.
Hey, what'd you think about the Ezra clip, though, of him taking control of this guy and it's definitely, we're seeing a change over this character that's pretty
I thought it was fascinating that's the only thing that we saw.
Yeah.
It was this literally like 32-second clip, right? And that's the only thing that we saw. And I think it just plays in nicely to what I've already dropped on this show and will drop again. Ezra is Snoke.
Oh, please don't let that be so. Please don't let that be so. I think he's something else. Anyways, all right. There's a quote about the season, though. And it's sort of an official quote about what's coming. And I want to read this, and it sort of brings to light a few things. Quote says, having established a secret base on Atollon, the Ghost crew, now led by a more powerful Ezra, strengthens the rebel fleet by acquiring new resources and recruits eager to stand against the Empire. However, the Imperial efforts to eliminate the rebellion are now being led by the coldly analytical Grand Admiral Thrawn, whose strategic, tactical, and cultural insights make him a threat unlike any they have faced before. And here's what's interesting. In Season 3, Ezra and Sabine take on new roles and challenges as the rebels prepare for their biggest mission yet, a direct assault on the Empire. It looks to me where Kanan seemed to be pretty central for Season 1 and Season 2, or at least part of Season 2. It seems like this is going to become the Ezra and Sabine show. So one, my first question is, do you like that? Are these the characters you want to follow closely as sort of the leads?
I like that.
Or is there others?
Yeah, I want to see more of Ezra. My interest was really piqued with the preview that we saw and the maturity that you're starting to see in Ezra and where that character is going to go.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated to see if this is, we read the sentence from their description, now led by a more powerful Ezra. So what I'm curious about is this, he's rising to become this leader due to his power, or is it due to an overall maturity?
Yeah.
Or is it due to desperate needs because Kanan's not part of the picture? I think I'm interested not so much as like the fact that he's in charge, but how did he get there? Why is he now taking over the Ghost crew or the more integral part of the Ghost crew?
It's a great question that you're kind of thinking through as you think of Ezra. And I just, let's look at, so along with this description in this clip, Jedi Bibliothek basically found like a list of the episodes
right
for the first 6 episode titles.
Right. Yeah.
And so here they are, Steps into Shadow, parts 1 and 2, which will be combined together on the 24th of September, Saturday night premiere. So the episode 2, or which would be really the episode 3, the following week on October 1st, is the Holocrons of Fate. So it looks like we're going to be dealing with the Holocron that Ezra acquired at the end of season 2. And then you have the Antilles extraction. So by the, I guess you could say, the third thing aired, we're going to get Wedge. Then we have Hera's Heroes, and then the last battle. Whoa, okay. There's a lot.
Right.
There's a lot in here. One, it seems like Steps into Shadow, and then the Holocrons of Fate. It seems like it's dealing with a lot of how season 2 ended. Like, what do you do with the Holocron? Where is Ezra? Where is Kanan?
Right.
The way those titles sound to me personally is they're very Force-centric episodes.
Yeah.
And then you get to more of a militaristic where you have the Antilles extraction where you're trying to get more recruits. What stands out to you about the episode titles? Anything big? Is there one where you read it and you're like, oh, what does that mean? Or I want to see that one.
I want to know what the last battle is.
Yeah.
That title is very intriguing.
Yeah, it's odd to have a title like that on episode 6.
Well, that's the other thing. I'm like, that's just episode 6. To have a title like that is very interesting.
Yeah.
It could be dealing with a specific character. It could also be referring to like the last battle, as in the one we just had, or the one we previously had. I'm interested in, obviously some follow-up from the ending of season 2 on this. I am curious, though, when it comes to the Antilles extraction, right? If we go back to our vintage recap NPR days, there was another Antilles that played a big part of this Star Wars story, and that, of course, was the one who was at the helm of the Tantive 4 when it received the plans of the Death Star.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if indeed we're going to get Wedge, or we're going to maybe get another Antilles.
Yeah. Well, we've seen Wedge in the clip, where so I think it's probably Wedge, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is reference to an Antilles family. And some of the listeners, I'm sure, will be aware, like, is there a relationship between Captain Antilles and Wedge Antilles?
Right.
I would love to find out. I don't know personally. But this is really interesting stuff to me. I'm really curious, and it's fun to sort of make predictions and then at the end of the season see if they played out the way you were hoping, or
especially for money.
Oh, yes. We're not gambling though.
Oh,
yeah. Sorry. So for not for money,
it's less fun then.
Yeah, I apologize. I got a quarter. You want me to just get that out?
No Republic credits here. Sorry.
What are your predictions? Like, what do you think are going to happen? Like, are there certain characters you're like, yep, dead, or we're going to see this happen?
Yeah. Oh, gosh, they're so good at throwing us curveballs, especially with the way that they cut the promos.
I know. Yeah.
It's almost unfair.
Well, in this first trailer, I think from what I've understood, the trailer that came out with Celebration and all that, a lot of people were saying that had seen those first 2 episodes. They actually said a lot of what you saw in the trailer are really from the first few episodes of the season. So we haven't even seen any imagery from down the road.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see the departure of Maul. I think that's happening.
Meaning he's taking a hiatus, or he's going to die again?
I think he's dead this time.
Dead?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Any predictions on to method?
I think Ezra's going to kill him.
Okay.
Yeah. I think Ezra's going to kill him. I'm really curious if we're going to see Kanan go. Again, I think of the comment someone made on our Facebook page, it's just basically said, Disney. Come on, Jeremy, Disney. And so that's when I pause. I'm like, oh yeah, they might not have Maul kill Kanan and then Ezra kill Maul because it's Disney. But in this progression that Ezra's on, it does make narratively some sense that there would be some sort of confrontation between Ezra and Maul. And typically someone that's in the dark side playing in that sandbox, you want to bring about someone to the dark side through anger and aggression. And I wonder if Maul will eventually start to coax Ezra into that. And then there's some sort of confrontation that just boils over. I don't know.
Something that sends him over the top?
Yeah, and
like the death of his master.
Yeah, it could be. You know, who knows? But Kanan's an he's such a good character.
Yeah,
and I don't know if we want to lose him yet. You know, I don't know. And of course, the storytellers know exactly where they want to go and what's happening. They're already making season 4. I mean, they're writing and I'm sure planning that out. So I'm really curious, like, where will Ezra be by the end of the season? I think he's going to have to make a major decision on who he's going to be.
He's going to be Snoke.
And oh, Devin.
I'm going to take that quarter when that comes true in episode 8, Jeremy. I'm just letting you know that right now. Going on the record.
You think we're going to find out in episode 8?
8 or 9. As long as I get that quarter with interest, I'm good.
Okay. What kind of percentage are we dealing with?
It's going to be compounded at least like once a quarter.
Yeah.
For the quarter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, do you guys hear that?
Oh my gosh, here it comes again.
Death Star facts!
Stay on target.
Any attack made by the rebels against this station would be a useless gesture, no matter what technical data they've obtained. This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
So this is Death Star facts in the lead up to Rogue One. We have dusted off the old Death Star technical companion from West End Games to share with you some wonderful tidbits about that battle station we love to watch explode. So here we go. This week on Death Star Facts, we're going to talk about the exciting waste disposal, waste removal system on the Death Star.
It's as good as it gets.
Yeah, it is. I felt like we should go there. All right, so let me read to you what the Death Star technical companion has to say about waste removal. I can't keep it straight. Waste removal. So here's what it says. Service was also responsible for trash removal and processing. Each corridor and room has a trash disposal chute that led into a waste collection bin, one for each sprawl, which was a huge section of the Death Star. There, droids would break the materials down into different categories of recyclable goods. I mean, isn't that good?
The Empire is green. This is good news.
They have the little like recycling like triangle. So
maybe your boy Tarkin was giving like PSAs of the Death Star intercom.
That's why I like Tarkin so much.
Reduce,
he
recycle.
recycles.
Yeah,
he totally could live in California. So
I was gonna say.
So recyclable goods like plastics, metal, food, water, these droids would separate it, as well as unrecyclable waste. The usable materials were sent for processing to manufacturing centers within the zone or to the bulk storage and replication sections deep within the Death Star. Wait, there's more. The rest was sent through long waste chutes to one of the numerous trash compactors for each zone. During the rescue of Princess Leia, from the Death Star's detention block, the princess blasted into just such a waste chute. The trash would then be compacted into the smallest possible size and then moved to a jettison compartment along one of the trenches. And the Death Star technical companion talks about, you know, there's the main trench where the X-Wings flew down, but there's also trenches all over. So they would go to one of those trenches, be jettisoned. Each of the bins and compactors was magnetically sealed so that waste materials wouldn't leak into nearby compartments. Like many starships, the waste collection bins and trash compactors of the Death Star were infested with Dianoga, commonly known as the garbage squid. They are known to consume everything except for pure metals. On board the Death Star, the Dianoga are both numerous and huge compared to those found on other starships. So there you go. A little bit about the waste removal on the Death Star. Did you guys know that?
I didn't know that. And that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I like it.
I mean, yeah, who knew?
So
the more you know.
So I guess on like a blockade runner, that you would have little teeny tiny Dianogas that would be like real cute and you can pet them.
Yeah, kind of like the small little alien.
Well, I never even thought about that. When you see that creature in A New Hope, it's in a trash compactor on a space station, so it had to be put there. But you don't think about that.
Yeah, it was put there to help clean up, like help keep it clean.
It's amazing.
It's the imagination is just extraordinary. So that's our Death Star facts. Hey, let's talk a little bit about Alan Tudyk, shall we?
Good transition, Jeremy. Let's do it. Speaking of Trat, no, I'm kidding. We love Alan Tudyk.
I will say this: K2SO, from what little we've seen, is probably one of the more compelling characters to me, simply because of the backstory that we've been given. Of course, Jin is the hero. We all want to know about Jin, but what I've heard about K2SO and his relationship with Cassian, I can't wait to see more and see this on the screen. Recently, Alan Tudyk was doing an interview with Blaster, and where he just kind of talked a little bit about the things he had to do to perform as K2SO. He was a motion capture character, but also a little bit about K2SO's personality and character. And I was curious, as you guys read the interview, was there anything that stood out to you about that?
Yeah, I think the two obvious things, well, I guess in regards to this specific interview, the most obvious was the fact that he was running around in sand on 10-inch stilts.
That's pretty crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be like a new Star Wars workout video that's going to
work out like K2.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it would be really, it's amazing. And just the balance he had to have kept in those scenes, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be fun to see any making of stuff where we get to actually see him in the mocap suit trying to do this, do these scenes. So
I think that he's, the complete opposite of C-3PO is going to add so much more depth to a droid than we've ever seen.
Yes.
The fact that they've already said that he's got something he needs to redeem, and C-3PO didn't have that complex of a history or character to him, and K2SO just is so intriguing that way. I can't wait to see it, especially when they describe him as Chewbacca in droid form.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in that interview, Jeremy, if you want to read from that was in Entertainment Weekly, that talks about this character.
Yeah, and some of you might remember back when Entertainment Weekly did the first rollout of Rogue One, there was this really interesting quote about K2SO. And so in the conversation with Tudyk, here's the quote. It said, "This towering and powerful security droid is described by Gareth Edwards, the director, as the antithesis of C-3PO. In other words,
loving it already.
He's tough, confident, not especially interested in human-cyborg relations, and the complete opposite of a neurotic fuss budget. K2 is a little bit like Chewbacca's personality in a droid body," Edwards says. "He doesn't give a beep about what you think. He doesn't fully check himself before he says things and does things. He just speaks the truth." I like this character simply because we've seen types of this character elsewhere in the Star Wars galaxy.
Yeah.
But it does start to bring to mind an interesting conversation about droids and free will. We know with K2SO that Cassian sort of has rescued him, and he owes this debt to Cassian Andor that, this person has saved me and has been able to give me free will.
Right.
And we see droids in the Star Wars universe that don't have that luxury.
Right.
Of course, the droid heroes that we have do have free will. BB-8, C-3PO. Sorry.
R2-D2.
R2-D2. But 3PO, had his mind wiped, where I think the juxtaposition is where with K2SO, he didn't. That's what the big saving moment was, is that Cassian saved him from that, changed his programming to where he can be autonomous and have his own free will.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, it seems like we've seen in the comics, a little bit in the books, some in the film, the movies, but The Force Awakens is dancing around these ideas. Is it time to explore in depth droids and free will? And I'm not talking necessarily in a novel or a comic or even animated, but I'm saying, should this be a major component of a film somewhere down the road? Does that fit Star Wars?
It'd be an interesting concept to follow. I don't know if I'd sit for like an entire philosophical film about free will and droids.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the
who
thing.
am I kidding? If they released it, I'd go watch it.
Well, it could be, I guess what I'm saying is you have films like 2001: A Space Odyssey that's dealing with that. I mean, you have HAL 9000, and what happens to him. You have other films and stories about droids or something that's been created by humans, whether you look at the great classic film Blade Runner,
sure,
where the replicants, they have this free will, but they have such a short time,
Right.
just a few years. There just seems to be these seeds being planted within Star Wars where that conversation looks like it's about ready to be had in a little more in-depth situation.
Yeah.
And I wonder if down the road, not as the main focal point theme of a film,
Right.
but I wonder if you will get a major character where you deal with that concept of free will, and it's not just maybe a few throwaway lines or a scene for humor, but something a little more serious. Is that Star Wars, though? I think that's sort of one of my questions philosophically is like, is this something Star Wars needs to explore?
Well, I think Star Wars has always touched on larger macro themes.
Yeah.
Maybe not to the extent that we have readily fleshed them out, but I think that they've always been there. And I think they've become more fleshed out as fandom grows and different opportunities to interact with fellow fans has grown tremendously. No, I think that'd be an interesting place to explore. And this goes back to something that we've talked about time and time again on this podcast, and that is if the story is well written and it's compelling, then, all in. We'll push the chips to the middle of the table. We're all in.
Yeah, we'll go on that ride.
Right.
The Star Wars universe is expanding. You're not only having different mediums where you have novels and, comics and video games and the films themselves and animation.
Right.
But thematically, I think they're going to start pushing the envelope a little bit and going to other places.
Right.
And, people have talked about genre, like, or will we get like a Star Wars comedy? Will we get, a sitcom on the Death Star about waste removal people?
No,
I say that jokingly, but like I do think Star Wars is now in this really, or Lucasfilm is in this really interesting space where you can now dream about like blending some genres where we're getting Rogue One and they've not left this. It's a war film.
Right.
Right. And so I wonder, when people have started to pitch Han Solo as sort of this sort of dramedy or this sort of comedic film that with action and all that kind of stuff.
But I don't need to see like the Office Death Star version.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that, but I am saying that you might see the blending in a little bit more of a pronounced way of some of these other genres.
Sure.
And I think that's what we're on the edge of looking down into this time period where we're going to start to see that.
Yeah.
And I think Droid Autonomy might be one of the storylines that we see, whether in a film. I think we're going to have a character where that will be explored to an extent, not as the main focal point, but something that is important to the actual storyline. And so I'm really intrigued if they will do that.
There's part of me that if we're going to start going down these larger philosophical questions and themes, that I think I'd like to see played out in a live action series where we have more time
like
to
TV, like Netflix series or something.
Yeah, something where we have some time to actually delve deep into it.
Yeah.
Right.
Or maybe just an episode devoted to.
Right.
In the course of a season.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fun to see what they do. There was another quote in that original Entertainment Weekly article, not this blaster interview that we're talking about with Alan Tudyk, but way back about K2SO.
Yeah.
And the quote says, it sort of ends the description of K2SO, and it says, like Jin, K2SO, he's also seeking a bit of redemption for past wrongs. Droids too can have regret. And so that first got me to thinking, well, it looks like we're going to start engaging sort of this idea of, what do droids, do they feel? Do they mourn? Do they have humor? And of course they do. We've seen R2 have that.
And that other golden guy.
and 3PO. And so, but that concept of redemption sort of got the wheels rolling for this week's Closer Look.
Yeah.
And so we're going to take a break. But when we come back, we're going to take a good bit of time to look at the idea of, I don't know if you want to call it redemption, but Star Wars being a series of stories that give characters second chances to maybe right something that has gone wrong, whether in themselves or something that they've done. And so we'll talk about this. Is Star Wars a story of second chances? And we'll talk about that right after this break.
And now, back to Unmistakably Star Wars.
So recently, a film came out with Tom Hanks, directed by Clint Eastwood, called Sully, which tells the story of Flight 1549, which was I believe departing New York. They ran into a flock of birds, took out the engines.
Not the band Flock of Seagulls, by the way.
No.
That would have been awkward.
That would have.
Yes.
It would have ended their career. Oh, it's already over.
Anyways,
So Sully, his name is Sullenberger, famously took this airliner and landed it in the Hudson River, and everyone on board survived. And with this movie coming out about that event, and really what came after it, where there was a lot of questioning of Sullenberger's, Captain Sullenberger's integrity, and did he really do what was the appropriate thing to do?
Right.
A lot of people have been interviewed that survived that. And one of the interesting things is there was a story in one of the Charlotte news channels with some of these actual survivors. The plane that was departing New York was actually heading to Charlotte, North Carolina. And so, it was 8 years ago, 155 passengers, survived. It was in the winter, so it was freezing. Water was freezing.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting to read some of these comments. Here, I want to read some of what they said. And one person, Jim Whitaker, who was a survivor, he's a Charlotte architect. He said the following. He goes, "You realize how thankful you are that while I'm alive, my family's still here. I still have my faith." It goes on, and he says, of all the people on the plane, the smallest, most defenseless. Whitaker's talking about his story. Of all the people on the plane, the smallest, most defenseless, the one that needed the most help was this little baby that was sitting next to him. He actually took the baby. The mother was afraid to that she wouldn't be strong enough to hold on to the baby in this crash in the water, and so he took the baby and held on to it. And just reading their stories, and Whitaker goes on, or No Bostic, one of the other survivors, says the following. He says about his life after. He says, "I take more risks now, I think. I'm more open to doing a lot of things because you never know how long I've got to be here." And, another person says, "No matter what happens, whether it's this event or anything else, I don't want something to stop me from living the life that I'm meant to live." A survivor named Barnhart said that.
Yeah.
And here's my point. You have this event that really was a life and death event.
Right.
These people in that moment thought they were going to die, and they didn't. And now they're approaching life as essentially, I have another chance. I have another chance to do some things that I might not have considered doing if I didn't think I was going to die.
Right.
And it really got the wheels turning in my mind, especially as a fan of Star Wars. And I started thinking about all these different characters all these stories, all these novels, comics, everything, and the films themselves. I find second chances compelling. You might want to frame it as I find a character getting redemption or finding redemption compelling. You could say it maybe that way.
Sure.
There's a quote by Philip Pullman who wrote, I think it's called His Dark Materials, a series of fantasy novels. And one of his quotes is, "She has committed great sins, but they've been forgiven, and that's why she loves so deeply." And I found that as I started to kick around these ideas more about second chances, I started obviously thinking about Star Wars. And I'm curious, one, have there been characters and moments in Star Wars where you've seen someone get a second chance that has been compelling to you or really kind of affected you or stood out to you maybe more than others? And I would love to hear your thoughts just on that.
Yeah, and so to be clear, we're not just talking about life and death situations, but anyone that gets like a do-over, a mulligan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Barb, we'll start with you. How about you?
Yeah, the one that I focus on the most with this question is Han Solo. And he has two instances in my mind that apply to both scenarios that we're talking about. One, he makes a mistake and he's redeemed for it, which, whether you want to look at it as a mistake or not, when he decides not to fight in the Battle of Yavin and to take the money and run, he redeems himself. He comes back, helps Luke to destroy the Death Star, a big part of that, and becomes a big part of the rebellion, as we see in Empire Strikes Back. So that's one of his second chances where he's been able to redeem himself, show that he's actually not some nerf herder, scoundrel, but actually has some character to him.
Right.
And then his second instance being in Empire Strikes Back, when he basically has to die. He doesn't know if he's going to survive being frozen in carbonite. And he takes it like such a man, but he's brave, and he knows that, he wants to save his friends and just take it like a man, and not knowing if he's going to get that second chance. Yeah. And what's really cool about it is that in the third movie you get to see that, and what happens after Leia almost raises him from the dead by unfreezing him from carbonite is he gets to show a bit more compassion, I think. The Han Solo that you see in Return of the Jedi is completely different than the Han Solo you see in A New Hope. And you just see this progression of the second chances that he's been able to have. And that's one of my favorite examples, and I always love Han Solo, so yeah.
Yeah, and I would argue in Empire that he might even have another situation like that, and that's when he goes out into the frozen night of Hoth to attempt to rescue Luke as well.
Yeah, you almost can look at the original trilogy as his second chance. And what's going to be fun is we got this Han Solo standalone film, it might not be a standalone film, but we have this Han Solo film coming out, and where we get to maybe see what he might be getting a second chance from.
Exactly,
Which I'm really curious to see what they do with that. But, there's this man that lives for himself, and we see this transformation where there's this man that lives for others.
Well, exactly. He falls in love with Princess Leia, which he's a lot more selfish in A New Hope. Yeah. And then when you see his character in the novel and Bloodline, it's very different. And then we get to see him again in The Force Awakens, and it's just amazing. Yeah,
let's come back to Han Solo in just a minute. Because there's, I think, a little bit more as we talk about his son, Ben Solo, and maybe redemption for Ben Solo in the future. But what other characters have you guys seen where they've maybe had a second chance, or we could even spin it this way: they've passed on a second chance? I don't know.
Well, I think some of the most obvious ones that come to mind, and it's interesting what some have done with their second chance compared to others.
Yeah.
Because it always hasn't been I have a second chance, therefore I'm going to choose a much more enlightened path.
Yeah.
But so here's some that I jotted down in no specific order. Obviously, toward the top of the list, however, is got to be the engineer of the Death Star. Because he got his second chance.
That's a good one. I didn't see that coming, Devin.
Yeah,
good job.
And still blew it.
He screwed the pooch.
Yes, twice.
Okay.
How many hundreds of thousands of people died because of this man?
Just enclose the reactor core.
Yeah.
First thing you do.
He's the anti-Sully, obviously.
Okay.
It would seem that Boba Fett had a second chance because he was told this time no disintegration.
Yeah.
R2 certainly following A New Hope, right? They took whatever parts they could to bring him back, and he obviously did well for the rebellion / resistance. In a slightly more serious note, though, leaping from comics into film, we see Lobot.
Yes.
And I think that is a very compelling argument for a situation and a set of circumstances that could forever change how you go about things. Yeah. And his second chance was obviously so compelling that entire comic parts were featured on that.
Yeah.
And then to go in and then to have that backstory and go see Empire on the screen makes that character very alluring.
Yeah, I would say this: if you're not sure what we're talking about and you're listening and you're like, wait, what is this? In the Lando comic, which is I think five issues.
Yeah,
correct. It's one of my favorites, and kind of the centerpiece is this relationship between Lobot and Lando. Lobot makes a decision that it sort of changes the course of both of their lives.
Right.
And in some ways they look at it as their second chance. And so I would definitely recommend going to check that out. It's a good one. I didn't think of that one, Devin.
And then we're seeing where this one is currently going, and that's with Maul.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of plays into what I was bringing up before is we're not always looking at people who are taking that second chance and going for enlightenment or redemption, but sometimes
something much darker.
Revenge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then my fingers are crossed for the next great one, which is the second chance for my woman, Captain Phasma. So to be determined.
As we've been talking about 2 weeks ago, there was a conversation. Kevin Smith, the filmmaker, was on the Star Wars show.
Yeah.
And there was sort of like they show a little extra video of, those conversations, that wasn't in the actual show.
Right.
And Smith was talking about a conversation he was having with, the people that make Rebels, and they were, it was Dave Filoni. And Filoni really changed how Smith was thinking about the prequels.
Yeah.
And the kind of the essence of what they were talking about was like, go look at the prequels and watch it as it's the Jedi's failure.
Right.
And you can actually, and the more we talk about the prequels, and it's been sort of a topic a lot lately for us.
Right.
And we had a much more in-depth conversation on a past episode of Unmistakably Star Wars, but the prequels really inform the original trilogy in some beautiful ways, one of which I think is when we think of this topic here, you see Obi-Wan and Yoda getting a second chance.
Right.
And they don't blow it.
Right.
And it's really good because you see their pride is seeped in. They become assassins. They become, they really leave what makes the Jedi.
Yeah.
They fail. The Jedi Order collapses. It's all about their pride, and that's their undoing. And then you see in the original trilogy, here's Obi-Wan, this long-suffering man who stays on Tatooine, maybe stays on, but he's around Luke for 19 years.
Right.
Watching him grow, watching over him.
Right.
And then when he gets a few weeks, he puts everything he has into the life of Luke, and in a very intimate way, and for 2 weeks.
Right.
Maybe even less. And then lets go of his life for Luke.
Yeah.
And then you see an almost identical thing for Yoda.
Right.
Where he gets a second chance. He trains Luke, and as best he can.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think when you look at it that way, it's really fascinating. Like, here's their second chance. What do? They go and they're much more, in some ways, uninvolved in what's happening and lets the Force guide them in a much more organic way instead of forcing the issue.
And I think that we saw Luke's second chance post Bespin from Empire, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're going to get to see that again with 8, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's leading to kind of the next part of this conversation about second chances. We started out where Barb brought up Han. I think Han had his second chance on that bridge, like a second chance, where the way Ford portrayed him, he was an absent dad. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what you keep coming back to. You keep thinking, and in fact, Adam Driver in an interview said as much about Kylo Ren, was that Han Solo became absent.
Right.
And we see that a little bit in Bloodline. Like, he's absent from Leia, right? And we even see that in Life Debt. He's absent from Leia. And you see this moment where he could just let it go and not get involved. And what does he do? He does what he does best. He comes through.
Right.
And he goes out onto that bridge to try to call his son back.
Right.
And try to redeem him. It's his second chance of being a good daddy, And he goes out there and says, no, you're going down a wrong path. Come back to me. Come back to your family, who you are.
Right.
And he did all that he could do. You can't change a person's heart. Right. So he comes back and does everything he can do as a father to try to call his son back to the light. His son refuses. And so I think it leads into like, is Luke now looking at Rey as a second chance? Because we know something happened to his school.
Right.
Something happened to Padawans or Jedi, or if that's what happened. I mean, it seems like from what we're gathering that Luke had some sort of like institution or some sort of thing that he was doing where he was trying to train a new group of Jedi.
Right.
Obviously that failed. Most people think Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren killed all the Jedi. That seems to be kind of the prevailing theory.
Right.
That sort of drove Luke into hiding. And is Rey his second chance? Are we going to continue with this pattern of second chances? And now is Luke going to view Rey that way? Oh, well, I was done, but maybe I shouldn't be done.
Right.
Maybe I need to train Rey.
Right.
What do you think about that idea? Do you think I'm getting close to the mark, or do you think I'm...
Well, we know that he has to train Rey. Like, that's what's going to happen. But I think the Luke we're going to see is going to be something that none of us really expects or even recognizes as Luke, with what he's been through. So, I mean, yeah, we can call it a second chance maybe, but I think his reasons will be very interesting and very different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know I'm dovetailing on that and with you. I think that the opportunity is there.
Yeah.
And whatever he decides, one way or another, right? The fallout of that will ultimately be the result, or will result in his second chance or third chance, however we want to label this, right?
Yeah.
But I think that if we can just quote Geddy Lee, like, our failure to decide is, okay, I'm paraphrasing, but even when we fail to decide, that like that's still our decision.
Yeah.
Like when we stand and choose to not make a decision, we're still in effect making a decision.
Yeah, and I wonder if like Luke is going to get yanked off his pedestal. You know, where a lot of the fandom is like put Luke Skywalker up on this pedestal.
Yeah.
And, you know, here he is on the fringes of the galaxy when crap is going down and he's absent.
Yeah.
You know, and he's, you know, off in his corner crying, you know. And I think it might be good for fandom to say, no, he's not perfect. He needs a second chance. Like, you know, here's a second chance. Like, let's see if he can, just like Yoda, just like Obi-Wan. Like, we love these heroes, but like they're flawed.
Right.
Right. And I think Luke has made some missteps, but we haven't seen like this huge misstep. And it seems like something happened with him and Ben Solo, and it was bad.
Right.
And so I want to like kind of steer the conversation to Ben Solo.
Okay.
Because one of the things that I have found so interesting is I'm making a big generalization. There are a lot of people that have said, no way does Ben Solo turn good or Kylo Ren turn good and get redeemed. And it made me think of something that happened in history. There was and I'm going to get dark here for a little bit, but there was a character named, actual murderer, and his name's Jeffrey Dahmer. And Jeffrey Dahmer murdered, it's like in the teens, young boys. And he went to prison. And if you watch the video of him going to prison, or his court case in the initial trial, it was chilling, lifeless, dead, like just this blank affect on his face.
Right.
And then what was interesting, and I'm not I don't want to say what my opinion is. I just want to tell the facts of the story and just sort of what human nature tends to be in these situations is he ruined the lives of tons of families by taking their loved one away in horrible ways.
Right.
And these families today are mourning that loss. While in prison, Jeffrey Dahmer changes. Some people say he became a Christian. Some people say he found God. I don't know how you want to frame it. There was a pastor that was visiting him in prison. The church that the pastor was a part of basically told him he needs to stop doing that. That Dahmer should never. There's no grace for Dahmer, right? He's a serial killer, right? So Dahmer goes around, says that, I'm this believer in God now.
Right.
And it infuriated people. They're like, no. You don't get a pass, buddy.
Yeah.
And you watch interviews with Dahmer after he says he's changed and he's different. I don't know what you do with that, but there is life in his face. It's unnerving and it's troublesome to me. That here's this guy that does all these horrible things and all of a sudden he says, I found God, and he looks different, acts different, seems at peace.
Right.
Doesn't compute for me.
Yeah.
And it's interesting watching kind of the real world response. It's like, no, in fact, he was beaten to death in prison, right? They beat him to death and he died in prison. And, but here's this tension, like you don't get grace, buddy. You don't get forgiven by God. You don't you don't get forgiven by man.
Right.
Then we go to a character like Kylo Ren, where he murders his own father, who in the Star Wars, galaxy is this incredible hero,
right?
Favorite.
Yeah.
And people see that happen and they're like, no. He doesn't get redeemed.
Right.
He doesn't come back to the light. He's had his chance. It's over.
Yeah.
Should he ever come back to the light?
Oh, goodness.
Well, let's take a look.
Or would you be okay if he came back to the light?
Let's take a look at Darth Vader for a second, because people seem okay with Darth Vader being redeemed. Now, let's take a look at what he did.
Yeah.
He killed so many Jedis. So many.
Yeah.
Little younglings. And we're saying that it's okay for Darth Vader to be redeemed. It makes sense. It's how it's supposed to be. Yet because Kylo Ren has killed our favorite character, there's no chance that he can be redeemed. Now, we don't know what else Kylo Ren has done specifically. It sounds like he's done a lot of other stuff. However, if we're going to say that it's okay and it's right that Darth Vader has been redeemed, you can't say that there's no way we're not going to stand for Kylo Ren to be redeemed.
So what would it take then? Because here we have, when part of Vader's redemption, the linchpin in that was him literally saving his son. So what would it take then? If we're going to go out on a limb and say, okay, Kylo Ren can become redeemed, so what would that take then?
I think like this idea of second chances is interesting because, you have some people would say, well, Kylo Ren, that moment on the bridge was his second chance. He lost it. Like he had done something horrible.
Yeah.
People are insinuating that he killed everyone in Luke's school.
Right.
And betrayed his master.
Right.
And that moment on the bridge was his chance to come back and find and he rejected it. And so it's done, right? I think Vader actually had multiple chances. Case in point, his moment with Ahsoka, end of season 2, Rebels. Right?
Sure.
So multiple chances to get this redemption.
Yeah.
I think there has to be. I think the reason why the Vader redemption is a little bit more, people are more accepting of it, is one, you don't really know the characters he kills in the films. Like, the little boy, he turns his lightsaber on. We don't see it. We know what happens, but we don't see it. And, that was kind of dark. Okay.
And there's that planet called Alderaan.
Yeah. Well, let's keep going, right?
Yeah.
So it's very impersonal in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Han Solo, we grew up with him. We've seen him and all these fun stories. He's made us laugh, and all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. But when you talk about someone getting redemption, there is consequences for what they've done. And I think seeing the consequences is very important. Here, I'm going to give 2 examples, one from Star Wars and one from outside of Star Wars. I'll start with outside of Star Wars. With The Lord of the Rings by J.R. Tolkien, you have a character named Boromir in the Fellowship of the Ring. And you see it in the film. I like the book version better. But Boromir tries to take the ring from Frodo. He's very aggressive. He goes into this very dark place. He breaks his trust. He breaks his promise that he's made to Frodo to protect him. And he wants to abuse and hurt and take from Frodo what is his and what he's tasked to do. The cost? His life. He's forgiven. In fact, Aragorn forgives him.
Right.
And I think the film does a really good job of showing that kind of moment.
Yeah.
He's forgiven, but the cost from his wrongdoing is his life. Even though he's forgiven, everything's good.
Right.
Vader, same thing.
Yeah.
There's a cost. It's his life, but he redeems himself by giving his life for his son. It costs his life. And I think people are willing to go, okay, if you're willing to give your life for some greater good, that's the payment. And I think with Kylo, if he is to get redemption, he's going to have to give his life at this point.
Well, what if he does and survives?
I don't know. I don't know if people will be that accepting. I don't know if I'll be that accepting, to be honest. Like, I think I'm all for him coming back. I think he's going to have to. I don't want to see him like hanging out in episode 10, 11, and 12. Like, he's done. I'm okay with him redeeming himself. He's going to have to give his life to do it. That's where I land.
Is it just giving his life, or to what extent? Is it giving his life to save Leia?
I don't know.
Is it
Maybe.
giving his life to kill Snoke?
Maybe.
Save Rey?
Yeah.
Or maybe kill Rey. I'm sorry I had to do that to you. If you guys don't know what we're talking about, last week we were talking about what if Rey turns to the dark side, which a lot of people are suggesting, and it just bothers Devin. So sorry, man. I just had to throw that out there.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's what friends are for.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think from a Star Wars centric mindset, right? Based on the ring theory and the rhythm of the Star Wars.
Yeah.
I think my heart says yes, but how that is done, it needs to be so overtly obvious. Like, it has to be one of those, there's his redemption moments, and not just he sacrifices himself, right? But it's the stakes are super high.
Yeah.
Right?
It's for someone that we care for.
Yeah.
To give us that person, to keep that person alive that we care for.
Right. Now,
let me ask this.
Okay, because I want to throw something out next, but go ahead.
Okay, well, do you think he will, though? Do you think the rhythm of Star Wars, the poetry of Star Wars, what we've seen, the ring theory, these concepts, do you think it'll come around to a point where Kylo does something that brings him back?
Well, and this is where my heart says yes, but honestly, I want to see them zig when we think that they're going to zag.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this trilogy is going to break from that ring theory. It's going to go a way that we are not expecting.
Interesting, yeah.
Or that it comes, the theory holds true still, but it comes in a way that we're not seeing at this point because we don't know what the next two installments are going to look like.
Yeah.
What happens if Leia kills him?
No, that's not going to happen. That's
moms can't kill their kids.
No. You know what I really find interesting? I for some reason, and it's going to sound bad because I love Han Solo, I have empathy for Kylo Ren.
Wow.
And I think part of it is that J.J. Abrams did a good job of portraying the humanity of Kylo Ren.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we see in our first introduction of Kylo Ren, we see his face. In the sense that the first film that we are introduced to him, he does reveal himself.
We see his humanity.
Exactly. And there's something about that humanity that came across, even when he was on the bridge with Han Solo, making it look like he was breaking down. There was sincerity behind who he is.
Yeah.
And yes, he's killed our beloved character, but they still managed for me to give him some sympathy or empathy.
Yeah.
I think he was playing Han Solo the whole time.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Tears and everything, huh?
Yeah.
I think, we will find out what was going on with Kylo. I think the film sets it up to where we see the struggle he's having when he's talking to his grandfather.
Well, that's the scene I was going to say. That's not even for Han Solo's benefit.
Yeah.
That's a private.
That's a private moment where he's feeling the pull of the light, and he doesn't want to feel that pull.
And I think the tears are showing that pull, but he goes the other direction.
He refuses it. He shows Snoke who he is, who he wants to be.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like, I think his words, well, I think Han was reading them one way.
Exactly.
His words were the exact opposite.
Well, I agree with you on that. But I think the emotion behind it was real.
Yeah.
But he was saying, I have something I have to do, and I don't think I can do it. Will you help me? Of course, he's talking about killing him.
Yeah. So can he find redemption?
I think it'll come around to that. But here's where I get stuck, is just as we, and fans of Star Wars love to do this, like what's going to happen next? What's our favorite theory at the moment? We love to theorize about Star Wars, but where I get stuck is it's all on this character of Snoke. I think once I have a better idea of Snoke and his motivations and who he is and what he's after, I can then properly place Kylo Ren in the storyline. But right now, because there's such shadow over him, I don't know where he's from. I don't know what he wants. I don't know, where he's going as a character. With the Emperor, I knew where he was going. I knew what he wanted. He wanted Luke. He wanted to discard Vader.
Right.
He wanted to, in some ways he wanted to, continue his dominance over the galaxy. Now, there is some mystery to Palpatine, but I had a better idea of what he was after.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With Snoke, I don't quite know. I don't quite know where he's at. And I think once I can place him a little bit better, I can kind of understand where Kylo fits into this. And then I can start kind of playing with the ideas, well, what will Kylo need to do to find redemption? What will happen? Yeah. And that dynamic, he's closely tied to Rey somehow. Mm-hmm. And we need to see that dynamic play out as well. And so I think Rey is a part of this puzzle. I really do. And maybe even Luke himself. It might be these four characters that we get really focused on.
Well, I think that's why speculation on how he will be redeemed is really difficult when we don't know where the story is going yet. And after Episode 8, we might be able to
I think
answer
Episode 8's, I think it's going to do this. It's going to be a huge leap for not only the Star Wars saga in general, overall. Just from everything we're hearing, it just seems like Rian Johnson is just he's pointed out where he's going to hit his home run, and he's going to take a shot and see if he can do it. And people are saying it's a weird Star Wars movie. People are saying it's different. There's all these rumors going on about what happens in the film, which if some of those rumors are true, I'm kind of blown away and excited all at the same time. And I think at the end of Episode 8, we'll sort of have a much clearer picture where everyone stands. But one of the things that Force Awakens did well, and it did many things well, but one of the things it did well is it gave us all this mystery. And we've talked about it on past episodes. But, we have the mystery about Snoke. We have mystery about Kylo. We have mystery about Luke. Mm-hmm. We have mystery about Rey. We even have some mystery about Leia. And even in some ways, Poe. And there's all this mystery, and there are gaps in the story from between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens that we just don't have filled in yet. Right. And it's fueling, I think, this fervor on the part of fandom to know. Just today I was sitting down and I was clicking through my YouTube channel like subscriptions, and I subscribed to all these different kind of Star Wars-centric channels on YouTube. And I would say almost every video from the last 2 weeks that these people were producing is a theory of some sort. Snoke is, Plagueis is, it was just like, who is Rey? And we just did that recently. And I think I think it's fueling a fire of fandom that's good. And we're going to start getting answers, I think, when Episode 8 comes out. The big question is, are people going to like those answers? Is that what they want to hear? Because we're formulating what we want in our minds, and it's going to be interesting to see if what we have in our minds is what we get, and if we're okay with that. So it's going to be really fun to see.
Some of us are going to be great with it. Some of us are not going to be great with it.
I think
that's the way it always is.
Well, and I think there's some types of fans that are generally, they get into a space in their own head where they kind of plan it out and tell their own story in their mind.
Right.
And when it doesn't quite match up to that, because their story in their mind is probably better to them than the story that someone else is telling,
right,
and they get disappointed. But if you can find a place where you're just like, hey, take me along for the ride, I'm going to enjoy it, I'm going to speculate, but I'm not all hung up on it. You tend to have a much more healthy, in my opinion, experience with Star Wars. So, any other thoughts about on second chances? We didn't really even dig into like Rebels. I would throw out Kanan as basically his stint on the Rebel series. Like I think he was, it's about his second chance as to be a Jedi, his second chance to be a Jedi, his second chance to train Ezra. I would pick him as one of the foremost characters in animation where we see a second chance.
Wow.
Is there anyone else that comes to your minds though as we kind of wrap up this episode?
No, I mean I think that look, we can probably make a very detailed long list, right? Because once again we come down to second chance could be a small nuance or it could be this life-changing event.
Yeah.
But I think the ones we've thrown out there are obviously ones that are compelling.
Yeah.
And are worthy of dialogue when it comes to this whole topic of second chances.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think you're hitting onto something that I think attracts us to Star Wars. And that is in some small way, because you said, what about these big dramatic things? There's something nuanced and small.
Right.
I think in many ways we, every morning we awake and we're like, oh, I'm alive.
Another chance.
We got another chance.
Yeah.
So I have another chance for, like in my case, in my context, I'm a high school teacher. I have another chance with my students tomorrow.
Yeah.
I have another chance to impact their lives.
Right.
I have another chance to love my family well, to love my kids, to love my spouse, to, be some type of blessing to the people in my life.
Right.
I have a second chance. And I think there have been people that I've met in life that have unnerved me because they look at life that way. I don't normally look at it that way. Like a lot of my Mondays are like, damn it, I have to go work. I have to go do this. I have to go teach this class of ungrateful students, and I get caught up in my own negativity sometimes, but I've met people in my life and they're memorable people that look at life more like, well, here is my second chance today. I have this moment to do this right or to set this right.
Yeah.
And I think when we see characters in Star Wars doing that, it reminds us like, oh yeah, like I got a second chance too in my little small way in my world.
Right.
And I think that's what makes that unmistakably Star Wars.
I can't even follow up on that. Can someone pass the tissues, please? That is amazing.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for listening to Unmistakably Star Wars. Please check us out online. You can find us at unmistakably.starwars.com. We have articles coming out this whole week on different kind of corners of the Star Wars galaxy. You can also find us on social media. At Twitter and Instagram at Unmistakably SW. You can go on Facebook and find us there as well. And we got several episodes coming out this week. We have not only do we have the Star Wars on tap, but we'll also be starting to play around and coming back in the coming weeks to Vintage Recap. And we got a few more tricks up our sleeve, like I mentioned at the top of the episode, where we have this new show about books and lore and character study. So pay attention. All that stuff will be coming out in the coming weeks. And hey, as always, may the Force be with you.
Thanks for listening to Unmistakably Star Wars. Join us again next week for more news and insights like only we can bring you. Until then, lock the door and hope they don't have blasters.